I don't have a link to film here because somehow it is removed from YouTube, but it does say Sartan Rouge transcript, right? So here are some dialogues from Sartan Rouge. And I'll show you because it actually starts from somewhere here, not exactly here, but this is apparently the first thing that you hear in the film. And it is not a dialogue by the characters. The character is watching TV, and in TV you find two more characters, a male character and a female character. And the woman asks, and if I was a liberated woman, would that bother you? And the male answers, that depends. In the manner he says, that depends, the woman says, in that case, I will be yours. And Hiam Abbas is actually watching this TV show while having supper, I would say. So it's the story of a Tunisian widow. And if you know, Tunisia is a Muslim country. And this protagonist, Hiam Abbas, is the central character, is the protagonist in the film. I was trying to find clips of this film at least, because this film was there for the past a decade and a half on YouTube, but somehow it was removed last year. I believe it was there since 2002, I would say, right? That was the time this film was produced. Raja Amari is sitting on the left, and Hiam Abbas, the protagonist, is sitting in the middle. And I think here they are just giving an interview to a French TV channel while the film was released at some exhibition in France. So you can see that these two Tunisian women look quite modern in this image. And I would think that Tunisia has a different culture. If you want to compare it with Pakistan, because it's a Muslim country, it would make sense to have some comparison. It says that it says that Tunisia, officially the Republic of Tunisia, is a country in the Maghreb region of North Africa. Somewhere in North Africa, but you can see these two women do not look like Africans at all. Tunisia is a Muslim country, and I think many of these women have...
Ma'am, your screen isn't shared. I can't see your screen.
Sorry. I thought that is the first thing I had done when I started.
No,
but somehow, let me share again. Okay, can you see the screen now? So how were you seeing when I tried showing you the Google Drive? I was sharing then and then I disconnected?
Yes, I think that it was only up until it was just the first few minutes, and then it just got disconnected, I think.
Okay, so this is the director on the left. This is Raja Amari. We would have thought Raja Amari is perhaps a man, because in Pakistan Raja is a male name. But this is Raja Amari on the left. Hiam Abbas in the middle, and somebody in France is interviewing these two ladies during the film festival. We can partly watch it because, as I said, that Hiam Abbas, who is in the middle, is performing the role of a widow. This widow lives a very conventional kind of life for so many years after she becomes a widow. So she's raising her little daughter, and these were the dialogues. I'm not sure if you watched these before. I said I had posted some of the script here, so it says transcription of the dialogues. It's not showing names of the actors. For example, this first dialogue is by the woman within the TV. So the woman in the TV says, "And if I was a liberated woman, would that bother you?" The male says, "That depends." And I said, the manner in which he says that depends. The woman says, "In that case, I will be yours." So those who have not seen the film, I thought if you read these dialogues partly, it would help you understand what's happening in the film. So I think it's very critical that the film begins with this kind of dialogues between two characters on TV within the film, because this actually sets up this whole film. What happens to Raja Amari as a widow after having lived a very long conventional life, because she was raising a little girl. There are some scenes, I tried looking for scenes of the film, and I think I wonder if this represents the first scene.
حسب ما تفعلين.
سلمى بيضة ماشية للفارماسي متاع الليل. مقبولة خارجة في الفم. ما تركضش في الشر. أنا هبقى مقصر في الوقت بالطريق.
All right. This wasn't a very good clip, but as you can see that this is the protagonist in the first clip. I think these are a few different clips from the film. So here Hiam Abbas is sitting watching the TV show from which I showed you these two dialogues between the characters on the TV. So this other woman is in the inside this TV screen, and she's the one who is asking the male in the TV show, what if I were liberated? And Hiam Abbas, you can see, is a very simple woman. At least she looks very simple in this first scene. As I said, she's raising the daughter. So in this one, while watching this TV show, you can see that she gets up and she starts dancing. This clip is not showing the whole dance scene, but she is in fact dancing before the picture of her deceased husband. So you can say that she is dancing in the privacy of the bedroom in front of the picture, and from her looks, she looks very simple. In some of the images, you can see the daughter who is now grown up. So one night, the daughter does not return to home at time. She's very late, and daughter apparently wants her own life, And Hyam is always worried about the daughter because she thinks that she's responsible for her, and her image will have an effect on Hyam's image. So when daughter does not return, she calls her mother and tells her that she is staying at her friend's house for the night. Uh, Hyam asks her, "What is this noise behind you?" And she says that we are having a party. So Hyam, in panic, leaves her house, and she goes after her daughter, looking for her at every other place because she's not sure where she is for the party. In great confusion, she enters this bar, I would say, and she's walking through the bar. She's in her normal dress, but late at night, a lot of men are actually sitting in this bar, enjoying drinks and enjoying dances by some of the presenters that you see in the film. Okay, so Hyam gets so confused that she becomes unconscious. She falls down, and the bar owner and the women who are dancers at the bar actually lift her up. They take her to the backside room, and when she becomes conscious, this is the bar she's entering, right? So when she enters, you can see that she's most of the time cleaning her own house or knitting for her daughter, and she gets some money from the family for her living. So that's how she's living. But this point onwards, because she stitches for different people as well, one day she meets one of these women uh, from the bar who had actually lifted her up when she had dropped inside the bar, when she dropped unconscious inside the bar. Right? As I said that she meets one of these women. I wonder which one of these actually shows that one. Let's try watching this one. Okay, so when she meets this woman at the market, she asks her what she does. So Hyam tells her she does stitching. So this dancer actually asks her to do stitching for her. And while doing all this work, she one day wears that dress herself and starts performing, not knowing that this other lady is actually watching her. She was doing it in the backside room of the bar. So this woman insists, and she walks her before the audience, and she performs for the first time. Hyam does not share this information with any of her neighbors because she knows that neighbors will not like her performances, because this is a kind of cabaret back in Tunisia. And as I said, that one of when she's doing this, she thinks that she cannot share this information. She cannot tell her family or friends that this is what she's doing. So one night when she's leaving to perform, the neighbors actually find her leaving, and they ask her where she's going. And she says that she's going to get medicine for her daughter. She lies. Neighbors insist that their son goes with her to the medical store. At the medical store, she tells the boy that it's okay, I'll go back myself. So she leaves the boy there, buys medicines, leaves the boy there, and actually goes to the bar to perform. So this one of the dancers actually visits her during the day, and the way she is dressed, her neighbors get curious that why this woman, who is partly showing her body, visiting her. And this woman says that I do the cabaret. And Hyam actually leaves her. But this point onwards, the film is mostly not about the cabaret. She's about Hyam's life, and it briefly shows what she does at the cabaret, as you may have noticed in this clip. She gets interested in one of the musicians at that bar, not knowing that musician is also her daughter's boyfriend. She has a relationship, a very short relationship with this male. And one day, her daughter tells her that she wants her to meet someone and brings this boy to their home. So Hyam actually does not say anything, and he tells the boy when her daughter leaves to get some tea or drink for the boy. She tells her that she will be a very good mother-in-law. And the film ends at their wedding, and Hyam actually performs at the wedding. So I said that if you watch the film, it's a beautiful film, and it actually presents complicated life of a widow in a Muslim society. But at the same time, it reflects the difference between Muslim societies from one country to another. It presents a huge contrast from Pakistan, or it is very different from. It presents a culture which is very different from Pakistani culture. And as the film begins with this comment, "What if I were liberated?" I thought I should share these two articles for discussion of the content of the film. So one article is Dutch women are liberated, migrant women are a problem. We know that in 21st century.
Miss Vijaya?
Gigi?
Can I ask you if there was any controversy around this movie? क्योंकि जहाँ पे ये इन्होंने बनाई है वहाँ पे बात हुई होगी क्योंकि ये normal नहीं होगा.
I would say that there is controversy everywhere and about every other issue, right? Yes, so there would be controversies on many matters, and I am surprised that this film actually disappeared from YouTube in 2018, because until 2018 I know the film was available on YouTube. So it was on YouTube for at least 16 years, and it is removed from YouTube now. It's not available on Netflix. It maybe she has sold it to some channel, or I am not sure if she has removed it for what reason. It's basically her decision. I'm sure there would be a lot of controversy about this film, but as you can see that Hyam Abbas actually looks, these two women look very liberal in their present dress. And I would assume that perhaps the culture is much more liberated or modern in Tunisia as opposed to the culture in Pakistan. As we know that Turkish Muslims are also, Turkish Muslims are very different from us. Their culture is more like European culture, but not exactly European, but they are far more modern than Pakistanis. And their presentation and appearances are very different from Pakistani appearances. So I'm just saying that Islam has Islamic cultures differ from country to country, right? If you go to Africa, you will find a different image of Muslims living in Africa. And from Africa to Tunisia to UAE or Iran or Iraq, this image will keep on changing, and these images will be very different from each other. For example, Duria Kazi, I mentioned her while discussing visual pleasure. Duria Kazi says that what we are seeing in Pakistan right now is an influence of Arab cultures. For example, if we see women in abaya, these abayas were imported to Pakistan during the Zia era, right? So Zia actually started changing image of Pakistan, and we started importing an Islamic culture which was different from the Punjabi culture, for example, that has been in this part of the world for so many centuries. So I'm just saying that we started importing new elements to represent ourselves. So the culture was changing, and I can understand uh, that this film would be very controversial, perhaps even in Tunisia, because these two women, Raja Amari and Hiam Abbas, are performing in a manner that perhaps would be criticized in many ways. Also, the film is released in festivals, so I'm not sure if it was released like a commercial film in Tunisia, because commercial film audience is different from festival film audiences. So right now they are giving an interview to a festival organizer. Okay, so I'm sure there's a lot of controversy, and because the film is representing Islamic culture, so controversy will be there anywhere within the Islamic world, right? So content is definitely heavily controversial. Okay. So this here I have posted a number of readings on women liberation, and as I suggested that you could read any of these, I did ask you to read this one, and I also suggested that some of you try reading first few pages of this article. Nadia Sonneveld mentioned here. She is from, she's writing this region article on Egypt, and this article, can you see the names of the authors? Okay, it says Connie Rogeband and Mike Verlew. So you can understand that this article says Dutch women are different and liberated, and the other one is talking about situation inside Egypt. So Nadia Sonneveld is actually studying in Netherlands while she's writing this article. So it's quite interesting that these two articles are connected somehow, because the author is most likely based here when she's writing this article. The second article actually reflects on 200 years of feminism in Egypt, and it points to various situations that reflect on Egyptian Muslim family laws. And it mentions Qasim Amin, who is a judge at the court, and Azza Hekel. These two persons are actually 100 years apart. So Qasim Amin was there in 19th century, and Azza Hekel, I believe, these are 200 years, which actually mean that these two persons were working on similar issues between Islamic religion and authoritarian rule or patriarchy, even 200 years ago. So Qasim Amin is actually considered grandfather of feminism in Egypt, right? Or we do know that in Arab countries, this belly dance has been there for so many years, for so many centuries, and belly dance performances are mostly attended by men, and this performance within this film is a bit similar to the performance. Okay, so is Amna Wahid present? She is not present. Does anyone know what happened to her? Is she well? Because she was quite regular, and she has
Ma'am, she is out of town.
Okay. Okay, so internet would be anywhere. Okay, internet would be available wherever she is, but she's not attending. she's not attending classes, so I'm a bit surprised because she was very regular and uh, right. So this first article talks about, like immigration and problems coming or problems originating from migration of Muslim societies into Europe, primarily Netherlands in this one, because it says that over the past decade, a major shift in Dutch gender equality policy uh, was seen, because when these Muslims, you may be aware that in the last decade of the past century and at the start of first decade of this century, many countries in the Europe were accepting uh, immigrants from all over the world. So many people from Tunisia, Pakistan, many other African countries, and Turkey ended up in Netherlands. And all of a sudden, Dutch government recognized that they have given uh, naturalization or citizenship to people who are very different from Dutch people. So Muslims actually brought their own culture to Netherlands at the start of this century, at the start of the millennium. What they realized that Muslims had difficulty integrating with Dutch people. When I think you might be knowing that when Pakistanis travel abroad or they start living in America, for example, or in England, they hardly socialize with people in their neighborhood. Pakistanis are focusing more on Pakistanis back home, so they say they are there, they are here, and we are there. This is the kind of strategy all people have when they start living in different parts of the world. So they hardly mix up with the white families or white families around them, and that would be for reasons. For example, white people would normally have some kind of drink, or they will serve wine or alcohol, and Muslims would avoid such situations, so they would have difficulty mixing up. This article hardly points to alcohol. It's mostly points to other issues that Dutch government actually noticed after accepting so many Muslims in Netherlands. They felt that the Muslims were trying to oppress their women, despite knowing that Netherlands laws allow them equal rights. They think that the law says men and women are equal, but they had this feeling that Muslims actually put their male on pedestal, and men and women are not equal in Muslim societies or in Muslim cultures. So the article is off and on pointing to a dominant frame in news or in politics, and these frames were in discussions. I believe you understand what frame means. I said framing actually means highlighting a certain part. For example, you have a certain picture in a frame, right? So it just says policy frames, and you would notice many of the frames are actually emphasizing on the other woman, the migrant woman, the subordinate woman. So they are looking at images of subordinate women who are now Dutch citizens, and they feel that these women do not have equal position within their houses. The men are superior and women are inferior, and most of these women are not contributing to anything in life, particularly work. We also know that many of these Western countries give some kind of social welfare benefit to unemployed people. So if these women have migrated to the West, they are not working, but they are getting unemployment benefits. they are not contributing to social security, but they are getting benefit from social security being unemployed. So it means that the system felt that there was a problem, that these women were not willing to contribute, or their families were not allowing them to contribute, right? I hope you understand what I'm trying to say, that in the West, if both men and women are working, uh, social welfare actually comes from, social welfare benefits come from the taxes that they pay together, right? So these women, these migrant women were actually getting benefits, but they were not contributing anything to it. So that was one problem. And apart from that, they felt that because they had unequal relationship with the male within their houses, so there were certain other problems. That problems related to imbalance or inequality in terms of relationship, and it had a strong impact on their sexuality, sexual behaviors. For instance, they are talking about forced marriages in this article, because they felt that Muslim families were not letting their daughters or not letting their women decide who they wanted to marry. And in most cases, they were forcing their daughters to marry men they did not want to marry. So these are the situations that constantly emerge in this discussion, right? So whatever was happening was very different from the routine Dutch culture, right? So it says that Dutch gender equality policy was in direct clash with the culture that these Muslims had brought to Netherlands. What they needed then and there was some policies for the minority, because they had accepted minorities in their country, feeling that if they accept people from around the world, it will actually benefit Dutch culture. They thought diversity will be good for them, and that was the reason they had accepted migrants from Muslim countries, because they were looking for diversity in their own country. They think the situation that they faced after their arrival, this migrant woman became in focus. So it says that migrant woman was at the top of political agenda for all these years since 1995, because the problems were seen with the migrant woman. And this article keeps on saying that men were at the root of the problems that this migrant woman was actually facing within Netherlands. This keeps on mentioning dominant policy frames. It means that when these people entered Netherlands, the policies were different. The policies for supporting like Dutch citizens were different, and those same policies applied to the minorities when they entered Netherlands. But they realized that they need to change policies, because their first demand was that migrants will integrate with people around them, right? The article talks about emancipation and individual responsibility. So before these Muslims were coming to Netherlands, they were talking about emancipation of Dutch woman, which means emancipation of Dutch woman from Dutch male, because they thought Dutch male dominated Dutch woman. But after these Muslims arrived, they all of a sudden stopped talking about emancipation of Dutch woman, because after looking at Muslim woman, they felt Dutch woman was already emancipated. She had equal rights as Dutch male. They thought Dutch men and women were equal. But these Muslim families actually presented scenarios where difference was quite clear. So they needed they had to they had to focus on emancipation of migrant women, uh, which means that migrant woman should be freed from migrant male who is trying to dominate her life, right? The article keeps on mentioning these two concepts, autochthonous and allochthonous. Autochthonous actually is pointing to the women or who are same Dutch women, and the other concept actually applies to women who are different. So these two concepts actually focus on similar women and different women. So Dutch women who are there have been same all these years, and the women who have migrated to Netherlands are different. Okay, so it keeps on saying that for some time the difference was realized against the backdrop of religion. So they keep on saying that Islam does not allow men and women to have equal status. And then as you will notice that the concept in discussion is constantly changing, you would realize that culture is highlighted. And when culture gets highlighted, that it is the culture that these people have brought from Somalia or Turkey, that is showing unequal power relationships between the two genders. So Muslim women are also changing their status in Dutch, in Netherlands. So you would realize that they are also talking about if one woman is talking about like their status is changing, Muslim women's status is changing within Netherlands. So you would come across this woman, Hirsi Ali. Hirsi Ali starts criticizing Islam very, very heavily. She's a Muslim woman from Somalia. And she thinks that Islam is quite oppressive for women. Islam makes men and women unequal within the families, within the family system. Men rule and men decide what should happen in women's life. So because Hirsi Ali becomes very prominent within the Netherlands for whatever she is discussing, right? It means that she's also powerful within Netherlands because she's not behaving like women who are domesticated and who do not talk about their own rights. Hirsi Ali is very vocal, and I think it does say here that she's Somalian. The article would mention other Muslim women within Netherlands who would say that what Dutch government is saying is more about cultural differeces. And she says that why not, these other women say, why not talk about socio-economic differences, because the focus is on Muslim women's contribution through work. So she said we should talk less about cultural differences and we should talk more about socio-cultural, socio-economic differences, because we are talking about women's contribution in economic life or socio-economic life, or women performing as socio-economic builders within a certain society. Okay, so it just says that barriers for participation are exclusively located in the migrant Muslim culture, because Muslims are not letting their women work in Netherlands. it says that Muslim migrants should first change their culture before they can fully integrate in Dutch society. So basically, this article is pointing to changes, uh, pointing to the changes that Netherlands experienced over the past 2 decades, from 1995 to, I would say, to the end of first decade at least. This article was written in 2007, right? So I would say that this article is talking about problems that Netherlands was facing at least until 2007. Let me check the date of the other article, because Nadia Sonneveld is writing this article in 2017. So this is far more recent. So you can actually compare the content of the two to understand what is happening in these countries, in Egypt and in Netherlands. So one is definitely a Muslim country, and the other points to the situation of Muslim migrants in Netherlands. All right. So it means that whatever multiculturalism that Netherlands is experiencing after the arrival of Muslims at the start of the millennium becomes a policy issue for Dutch government, right? It says uh, multiculturalism as a policy goal and project has increasingly come under attack, right? So as we know that in each government we have, or in each country we have people who are sitting in the house and an opposition party. So this article actually keeps on discussing how left and right wings are reacting to the issues that these Muslims have created within Netherlands at the start of the millennium. The article is pointing to Muslim separatism, right? And then to segregation, because they are talking about integration of the people within the Dutch culture, right? So multiculturalism actually should respect all cultures. So if Dutch government or Dutch people want to claim that we are multicultural, we are a multicultural society, they should be willing to respect the culture that these people have actually brought to Netherlands. But their arrival has resulted in certain problems. So it says that multiculturalism actually points to liberal values of freedom and gender equality. But what should we do? Because these minorities have brought new culture, you have to give them equality. You have to give them freedom to be what they want to be. But if you keep on doing that, you will be you will be reinforcing inequality, which also reflects on violation of rights of women within their family system, right? So you can see that two different kind of thoughts are clashing here. The law allows multiculturalism, law allows freedom to be what you want to be, but if they allow freedom to be what they want to be, they feel that family practices or values of minorities are so different that Dutch government will end up reinforcing inequality and violation of women's rights if they allow them to be what they want to be, right? So this article is actually pointing to different kind of frames, different frames that keep on highlighting one type of woman over the other type of woman. Okay, so if you are granting multicultural rights to minorities, you are perpetuating patriarchal culture that includes subjugation of women, right? Okay, so is Amna Iqbal present? So the rest of the article is actually pointing to opposition and feminism, a clash between opposition and multiculturalism and feminism. Amna Iqbal, did you read this this second page? Amna? Amna, can you hear me?
Her mic is open. She's speaking. I think we can't hear her. Her mic is probably not working right.
She is not speaking. Her mic is open. If she was speaking, her mic will go up and down. Okay, she's speaking now, but we can't hear her.
Yes.
Amna, I don't know why we can't hear you. Can you try re-entering, leaving the classroom and re-entering the classroom? I don't know. I think she had the same problem even in last class. Okay, so I'll try explaining this second page as well while she tries to, I think she tries to enter or re-enter, and she doesn't have to leave. She can stay. I just wanted that you try reading what these articles are. These two articles are actually discussing, and how the other articles are reflecting on women liberation issues. It says that when government started discussing these policies and different policy frames were developed, different actors means that the minorities will be reacting to the policies, and left and right wings in the house will also be criticizing the policies. Apart from that, the organizations that deal with these migrants would also be reacting to the policies. So it says that different actors reflected, reacted to these policies very differently. Amna, I don't know. Okay. It says that situation became far more critical because this migration process had started back in 1990s, 1995 onwards. So September 11, which means 9/11, again had a strong impact on these migrations. We can understand that Muslims were highlighted because of the 9/11 attack, and Muslims were considered terrorists in most of the Western world. So this situation actually worsened with this kind of attack and clash of civilization that was already highlighted because of the difference between other women and Dutch women. This issue was also this issue became more critical because of new situations, and there was a tendency of and a stricter demand for integration of the people who had entered Netherlands in this time, right? So you can understand that 9/11 actually resulted in stricter demands for integration. And if there were difficulties in integrating with people, with the local people who were definitely a large majority of the country, so then people who are not comfortable living with them, then what exactly are they doing there is another question, though the article does not exactly point to any such question. It just says that how to make them part of everyday life, and how to increase their contribution in the system. So it says that these migrants should integrate and they should understand the norms and values of Dutch society. For example, Dutch say Dutch uh, talk about gender equality. So Muslim migrants should also talk about gender equality. Uh, Gender equality should be reasserted through their national identity, and there should be restrictive demands upon immigrants and resident minorities to practice gender equality in their everyday life. In this next paragraph, it says that migrant women have become an emblematic policy problem, right? Unequal gender relations in minority groups are now seen as a core problem because these Muslims who have come from Somalia or from Turkey, they are quite backward. They are reflecting or demonstrating the backward character of Islam and gap between modern Dutch culture and imported culture of immigrants. Imported culture of immigrants that does not show Muslims as equals. This problem is principally located in men. Here it says that it is basically the male who is responsible for unequal power relations between Muslim men and women. It says that Islamic cultures have a negative masculine culture, right? So I believe that when it points to a negative masculine culture, it is pointing to misogyny, and this article actually calls that it calls Muslim cultures misogynistic, and I wouldn't say that the author is directly calling misogynistic. The authors are actually saying that the way Muslims are practicing their culture in Netherlands shows that Islamic cultures are misogynistic, or Islamic male or Muslim male actually has a negative masculine identity, right? So the problem is located inside the male. And as I said earlier, that they are demanding that if you have come to Netherlands, you should integrate with the local culture. Right here it is saying migrant women are not only represented as victims of this misogynistic culture, and I said it's talking about Islamic culture right here. So it says misogynistic culture, but surprisingly also as the principal key to solving problems of integration. So these are the two things that these keep on discussing, that they have brought misogynistic culture. So we have to solve problem of integration and emancipation, which means that freeing Muslim women in Netherlands from Muslim male who is trying to rule their lives. So the rhetoric has actually moved from emancipation of Dutch women to emancipation of migrant women. It says that gender became a policy frame at the start of new millennium. So government had to talk about, like what policies they should have for giving them equal rights. Okay. Dutch gender equality policy should be applied to migrant women and migrant minorities as well. And so there is a greater need for integration between ethnic minorities and Dutch majority. Okay, so the article also discusses, here she's just giving, the authors are giving the questions that that this article addresses. It says, it is seeing how a parallel shift has occurred between Dutch gender equality policy and the migrants, the policy that is needed for the migrants who have come here. And then you have to talk about gendered cultural practices that are seen as problem, because Muslim cultures do have gendered culture practices. They do highlight uh, men or masculinity, or they clearly say what should be the role of women, which means that Muslim culture has gendered cultural practices. So gender model, uh, what gender model should the migrants adapt to live in Dutch land? And what should be promoted further as a national gender regime? Because you have to sort out this problem that is introduced after their arrival. So you need a new policy where both the cultures can actually integrate with each other. All right, so you would find policy frames that focus on gender and migration over the last decade, and that actors which with the coalition in shift and framing. So you would see that for 10 years or 15, 20 years, policy frames are constantly changing within Netherlands, right? All right. So any reactions to the situation? Because right now this article is primarily focusing on situation within Netherlands, but I think that it is pointing to the situation of women in other Muslim countries as well, right? So you have to you should try seeing if any of the concept here can be applied to the situation that this particular film shows, because we can see that within the film, Hiam Abbas has economic issues since or financial issues since her husband's death, right? In one scene in the film, her brother-in-law comes from the rural areas to give her some money after after the seasonal crop has been cut, and I think he comes to give her the share. When he comes, he notices that Hiam's daughter is sitting outside the house, and Hiam forgot to leave the key behind. So the daughter is waiting for the mother to return to enter the house. And brother-in-law also arrives there, and he notices that daughter is sitting there, and they wait for quite a while before Hiam returns. When she returns, he does not look like the Hiam they knew. She looks different because she went to a beauty parlor to get her hair cut. She goes to a shoe store to buy most fashionable high-heeled shoes for herself. And she does a few different things. So when she arrives, she notices these people there, and they ask her where she was. So brother-in-law is also curious because he's surprised with her behavior, with her absence while the daughter is waiting outside. She just says that she went for a haircut. And the daughter opens the bag and sees new shoes, and the brother-in-law and daughter insist that she should try the new shoes in front of them. The shoes do not look like something that Hiam would wear every other day. They are surprised, but they don't say much. Then he gives her the money, and I think he leaves in the morning. So it just says that this woman is actually changing tremendously Hiam Abbas is changing tremendously during this period, uh, which I would think is perhaps uh, more than 10 years after her husband's death, probably 13 years after in the film. So she is changing 13 years after having lived a very normal widow life that that Muslim women normally have within Muslim societies. She's changing within the Tunisian culture as she lives with just her daughter. I would say the system is very different from Pakistani joint family system because Hiam and her daughter have been living independently for these past years. In Pakistan, widows will end up living with their families in most cases. There will be some exceptional cases, but in most cases, widows will live with their families and the families will make decisions for them and support them, right? So it means that Tunisian culture is different because uh, Hiam's neighbors are worried about her. They are supporting her at least socially and emotionally, believing that she is a normal everyday widow who needs some support, or because that's why they send their son with them when she goes out to buy medicines at night. We know that it's not true, but Hyam actually lies because she does not want to tell them that she has a nightlife at this stage in her life. Okay, we can understand that similar fears about women's mobility would reflect in Dutch societies because if Muslims from Somalia or Turkey or from any other part of the world have moved to Netherlands at the start of the millennium, they will control women's mobility and women's decisions for work or type of work within Netherlands, right? So we can see that this is there is a situation which is presenting problem to the government, and in this part of the article it is saying that at the start government or the state was taking responsibility for the needs of the migrant people and also for the needs of Dutch people. So the policies, state was in charge of policies and state was in charge of all the matters. But by the end of the article, we learned that over a period of 10 or 15 years, state actually decided to separate itself from such decisions, right? They left some decision like these migrants should integrate with society, but they stopped being in charge of this relationship. Okay, so you can see that these issues became very prominent within the political system of Netherlands, right? Social problems became problems of the government because they have to sort out different kind of violations that are seen within migrant families because of their culture. All right. So it basically reflects on policies that Dutch government needed for these migrant people, especially migrant women. So migrant women were actually in focus. They are not focusing on all migrants, but primarily the situation of migrant women. The authors say that to explore how the debate on migrant women has evolved over these years, they have to look at representations of migrant women as a policy problem, right? And these representations were discussed in the houses or in government over and over again. So it says that the authors are using frame analysis method, and they are trying to understand what kind of frames are created about these women, because these frames will help in understanding the policy making process, right? Uh, some frames, it says that you would be looking at convergent or competing frames. For example, some frames would highlight position of these women in Netherlands, and some would highlight change in their position, and the challenge that these images are presenting to Dutch people for protecting the social order. Protecting social order is important because Dutch protect uh, equal rights of their citizens, whether men or women. And if these migrants are not giving equal rights to their women, it means they will violate equal rights, or this violation will result in disturbance within the social order or the system. So they need new policy frames to protect the social order, right? They have to identify causes behind differences. And they already identified one cause. They said Muslim masculinity is the problem. And they think that the problem of women actually begin with unequal power relations between Muslim societies or Muslim cultures. So they have to legitimize and empower women, and they have to create problem fixers, right? They have to create new political alliances for enforcing new policy frames and for strategic changes within the position of the genders. It says that they are creating these policy frames because these policy frames help them understand dominant and competing frames. For example, if the dominant frame would be subjugated woman or migrant woman, right? It also says that during this process, they end up creating, or these policymakers end up creating new stereotypes. For example, migrant woman becomes a stereotype which points to the position of the migrant woman who is oppressed, whose rights are violated, who does not have equal rights in a Western society where everyone has equal rights. So migrant woman is a new stereotype that is created. So migrant woman is one of the frames that is constantly discussed, right? So they are trying to understand blames and causality. And these frames help in understanding to help in developing a reconstructing a new policy, or it says to reconstruct policy. As I said, the policy originally was different. Original policy said that all citizens are equal. When they end up in a situation where they have migrants showing that men and women are not equal, they have to reconstruct policy frames that are more that point to some change in migrant women's position, or they have new strategies for bringing in new situations, or for developing or for solving the problem. It says that there were some social movement frames. I already pointed to this lady, Ayan Hirsi Ali, and as I said, that social organizations were also working with these people. and state was also working with these people. So you can understand that all these different frames were actually pointing to different kind of social movements, problem diagnosis and problem definition, and definitions were created around Muslim culture, Islamic culture, or so diagnosis of the problem was important, and as well as prognosis, which means problem solution was also important, right? So we will keep coming across different kind of frames or old stereotypes and new stereotypes within this discussion. So the causes can be explicit or implicit. So which means that you need to understand the relationship, and under multiculturalisms, the migrants would say that we have a right to be what we want to be, and we have a right to express or to enforce our culture. I said earlier that even Pakistan Constitution gives rights to minorities to protect and promote their culture. So if Dutch Constitution also provides similar rights to protect and promote your culture. Right now we are talking about promotion of a culture that is appearing very problematic, right? Because it is in clash with the dominant law of the country, and the law says all are equal. Any comment on what we have discussed so far? Myra?
Yes, ma'am.
Any comment on or anything from your position about what is happening there? Because it is constantly saying that Dutch were discussing unequal power relations within Muslim cultures. And if you have read later part of the argument, it does say that unequal power relations cause, for example, honor killing. Unequal power relations result in forced marriages. So in one of our last lectures, we did discuss honor killing of Saba Kaisar. So perhaps some of the texts that are actually mentioned in this article can be applied to Saba Kaisar's situation as well. Because Saba Kaisar's father keeps on saying that he provides her food. क्या उसके पास उसको खाना नहीं मिल रहा था, क्या उसके पास घर नहीं था? So these are the types of things that he keeps on pointing to, and in return he demands a right to make decisions for her life. For example, her father demands her to marry his brother's brother-in-law, like Chacha's brother-in-law, which means that he's forcing Saba to marry Chacha's brother-in-law, which would sound like violence of Saba's rights. And the article actually points to honor killing, which means that Netherlands government has actually realized that these Muslim people can actually kill their daughters even in Netherlands if they refuse to marry men the family chooses for them. So this article is not only pointing to women's role in contribution to the economic system, but it is also pointing to several social problems that they have actually brought to a Western society with them. And it is saying that it is not, this article is not pointing to anything from Pakistan. Saba's case is from Pakistan. This article is actually highlighting problems of Muslims from all over the world, but primarily it mentions Somalian Muslims and Turkish Muslims in Netherlands, right? All right. So who is next? Ariba and Ikra.
Ma'am, I didn't get a chance to read it. I was busy with my thesis, I told you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Ariba, did you read the next page?
Ma'am, I read the page 273, which you already explained.
Okay.
I can do it again if you need.
All right. I thought you should have mentioned. Okay, so do you want to add anything to the discussion? I would like you to do that, please. And I would like everyone else to contribute in discussion as well. Dear Ariba.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just start. So, uh, reconstructing policy frames, the author did this to analyze how and why gender has become the key issue in policy frames. Uh, the author first explains how the policy process is a contest as actors involved in the making of policy compete over how to define a particular problem. Because apparently the three things that are at stake in policy contests are: one, what is represented as a problem; two, who represented this as a problem; and third, the different assumptions that underpin these representations. So the actors use competing or conversion frames to construct a specific cultural orientation, which favors their own policy position. No, ma'am, wait, I just went to the third paragraph.
Right.
So,
You mentioned the third one as assumption. So if
yes, ma'am.
possible, try explaining what assumption means, because I think this needs a bit of elaboration.
Ma'am, in policy contests, like
Yes.
how the actors involved assume what the problem is. Like they say they're trying to define the problems, the same problem differently. So their assumptions,
Okay,
what their
I would
assumptions of the
yes, I would say that the assumptions are, for example, they said that Islam is part of the problem. They are pointing to religion. So one assumption is that Islamic cultures are behind these problems of inequality. So that is an assumption, right?
yes,
Because
ma'am.
if we talk about Islam as such, I think at least. At least what students or what you may have studied in school, in most cases we were taught men and women are equal in Islam, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So if
Yes.
in Netherlands, if they are pointing to unequal power relations in Islamic societies or Muslim societies, so that naturally they are beginning with an assumption, because when you look at the identity of these people, these are Somalian Muslims, right? Somalian
Yes,
Muslims,
ma'am.
and there would be definitely cultural research from past. So cultural research from past and present, actually, even for example, Orientalism theory uh, points to at least 22 countries in this part of the world, right? From Arab countries to African countries and to British India or subcontinent. All these countries are included in the list of Oriental countries. So there is an assumption, because Somalia is included in the list of Oriental countries. And I would say that assumption is actually pointing to misogynistic character of Islam, and misogynistic and also Orientalism. That is, and as we said earlier, that even Orientalism, uh, uh, while talking about Orientalism, Edward Said actually said that this kind of literature or Orientalism is also seen in paintings of past 200 years, in travel histories of past 100 years, and different authors have been writing about it, and great artists have been painting Oriental images. So I would say that this kind of assumption is there when these policy frames or these assumptions, when he says that assumptions are there, assumptions of different actors. So actors actually assumes that these people are Muslims, and Muslims do not have equal power relations between men and women. So all these assumptions or different things would actually relate to these things. So Orientalism, for example, would be a reference frame. Somalian means Oriental. That would be a reference frame. Muslim culture is a reference frame, and Muslim cultures appear misogynistic to Western world. So all these frames become part of the assumptions. So these people are actually pointing to different assumptions of the actors who are developing or influencing the policy frames. जी anything else? आप क्या कहना चाह रहे थे?
Yes, ma'am. So in the second paragraph, it says that some definitions are organized into politics, while others are not, meaning some aspects of social reality are discussed while others they're not included. So they decide. Also, the actors involved give shape to the problems to their liking by how they deliver them to the masses and how they propose to address them. Like they create a bias in how they deliver the problems. So careful analysis of this process aims to understand the ways in which social problem is represented in political domain. Number two, what particular understanding gains dominance. Third, why and what kind of understandings are discredited, like which assumptions they do not uh, entertain. And lastly, it is important to examine which actors form coalition on the basis of certain policy representations. And then next, to reconstruct the framing of this issue within the political arena, the evolution of debate on migrant women is explored, like what representations of migrant women are policy problems that have gained dominance over time. The author chose frame analysis for this reconstruction. The concept of framing is to stress the component of action. And then the actors use competing or convergent frames to reconstruct a specific cultural orientation which favors their own policy position. Then policy frames have various important political functions that are used deliberately and strategically by the actors. And like you explained the 4 points
Right.
previously.
So different actors, even the left wing and right wing actors would try to give a different meaning, because left and right wings would have different reaction to these situations, right? All right. Thank you. Thank you. Ji, any comment? Any comment from your position? Ji Hassan?
No.
Is Hassan present? I think he's absent. He's absent. All right. So in this next part, I just wanted that you react to these texts from your position. Because here the authors are actually talking about causal change of connections between different things that are happening or different problems that they are noticing within their culture after their arrival. It points to, for example, normative change. Normative here applies that Dutch have their own norms. So for them, equal rights is a norm, right? And these people who have come here do not have equal. They do not practice equality for both men and women. So they have brought new norms that show gender inequality, right? So gender inequality becomes a useful frame for discussing minorities' position within Netherlands, right? So for them, the Dutch is a normal Dutch equality between genders is a normal frame or normative frame, and inequality of the migrants, gender inequality of the migrants is the other frame. Okay. So it means that they have to, like this is how they are coding the frames and discussing these issues. So one is to, understand what is happening and why it is happening, and to identify who is involved in the construction of a new frame and who supports this frame. So they are just trying to understand. They are developing different frames around these people who are in Netherlands at the time. So one is a normative frame and one is a frame that focuses on the situation of the migrant people. So by creating these frames, they are actually identifying the problem, right? Whatever is represented as the problem, then they have to identify the cause behind the problem. And when they diagnose the problem, they actually talk about victims and perpetrators, and which means that when you identify victims and perpetrators, in this case migrant men and women, so then you can talk about prognosis of the problem. You have to look for the problem, right? When you identify the victims and perpetrators, then you can then you talk about solution of the problems and call for action or non-action, right? Who is given a voice in suggesting the course of actions, who should act and who is acted upon, which means that you are probably demanding from migrant male or migrant female uh, to to do certain things to change the situation. So it is just saying that first you identify the problem, you identify the victims and perpetrators, then you develop a call for action, and then you decide who should act and who should be acted upon. So these are all very sensitive questions. And for reaching the prognosis or solution of the problem, the development of different kinds of frames was essential. Okay, so right now she's saying that this kind of strategic framing actually helped in policy making, right? So different kind of frame alignment was needed, because if you are identifying the difference, then you would start talking about alignment of frames. For example, Dutch women or Dutch normative frame shows people who are equal, and the migrant subjugated woman actually shows unequal power relationship. So you next you have to come up with frame alignment strategies. Frame alignment, frame bridging, or frame amplification. So bridging actually means that Dutch people and migrant people have to bridge the gap between them, right? And when you bridge the gap, you can talk about frame amplification, that they improve their relationship, or the situation, work situation of migrant women, for example, should change. So that is the only stage when you can talk about frame amplification. Frame extension and frame transformation, which would imply that the situation is changing or transforming, and the situation of migrant women is improving, and migrant women are able to work in Netherlands, and they also have the right to choose a husband for themselves, right? Okay, so who is next? Ikra. And Ikra says that she did not read hers. All right, so Kanza is absent, so it means that I have to cover next two pages. And when we reach yours, Komal, please remind me to stop, okay? Okay, so it is saying that in Netherlands there was a debate for gender equality policies. and they were also called emancipation policies. If you understand, Jahangir, do you understand what emancipation exactly means, or some meaning of emancipation? How would you understand emancipation? Anyone? Emancipation actually means, Ji, does someone want to say something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ji, Komal.
I think Ariba can speak. Somebody else was speaking. I can wait.
Yes, Miss, I was speaking.
Ji, Mariam.
Sure.
Miss, the economic, social, and political rights.
Okay, so you are saying that emancipation actually means economic, social, and political rights of a person.
Yes, Miss.
Okay, all right. I think it is part of it's part of being free. It, when you talk about
The overall
economic,
rights,
social,
yeah.
yes. When you talk about overall rights, you are talking about freeing a person from decisions made by another, right? So emancipation, if you're talking about emancipation of women, it means freeing women or freeing women from men, whereby men actually take control of their economic, social, and political rights, right? So emancipation, if you look back, you would find that I think Lincoln probably talked about emancipation of Black Americans uh, in the latter part of uh, 19th century. It says Abraham Lincoln in 1863. This was the law, Emancipation Proclamation, made by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, freed slaves in the Southern American states, right? So it means that slavery was in US until 1863 under the law. We know this problem was there even until the end of uh, 19th century. It says 1863, which means somewhere near the middle of 19th century, but the problem wasn't solved even till the end because people were unwilling to accept this change, Emancipation Proclamation, which actually freed Black people from slavery. Right, so emancipation, in other words, keeping in mind what you said about political, social, and economic rights of a person. It just means that, women are probably the same as were slaves until the end of the 19th century because somebody makes their decisions for them. So these decisions are political, social, and economic. So Dutch here are actually talking about emancipation of women, migrant women under the Dutch laws, right? So it means that their system, or if they have a constitution or something similar to constitution, actually speaks of emancipation, freeing women or giving them equal rights. So right now it's talking about emancipation, and it just says that these migrants were accepted in Netherlands under the diversity policy, right? And diversity policies emphasize, they felt that it will make their culture rich, and that was the reason they accepted Muslims from all over the world in Netherlands. So the stress was on intersections with ethnicity, class, and sexuality, right? So it actually shows that these ethnic minorities had some kind of unequal power relationships when you refer to class and sexuality, right? Uh, Policies directed at migrants have also been labeled differently over time, which means that when they accepted these people, I said there were constant changes in the policies because they were trying to understand what is happening in Netherlands. and perhaps there were changes in government also, like left wing and right wing maybe may have taken over in different times. If the government is changing every 4 or 5 years, there will be changes. So it just says that there were changes in policies, and they are trying to constantly develop the policies. As I said earlier, that state was in charge of these matters, state was in charge of these problems following the arrival of migrants in Netherlands. But over a period of time, state learned to separate itself from this problem in a certain manner, and state made women in charge of these matters in Netherlands. And state said migrant women have to decide. Migrant women shall change. They shall work. They should work to change their position within the Dutch society, because they also realize that in most cases women are responsible for training their children or training their families. So if these people or these women were less educated, or if they were backward, so they have to work on position of the women. And if they can make women realize that they are responsible for this integration, for this change, so they have to actually work with women, right? So that's why I'm saying that by the end of the article, you would realize that state is separating itself from being in charge of many of the matters, and it's leaving it to women to work on these things, right? So migrant women have been labeled differently. So Dutch society actually recognizes these women as different. They are different. They are the other, right? So it says that these uh, these migrant women are represented as allochthonous, which means different women. Black migrant and refugee women. Black because many of them are coming from African countries like Somalia, and the migrant can be coming from anywhere, and there are refugees, because we know that if this article is talking about uh, new millennium, there was war in Iraq in 2003, and after that there were wars in other parts of the world. So there were refugee women in Netherlands. And by the end of the article, you would also notice that they thought about changing their laws. For example, no more refugee women are, or refugees would be allowed in Netherlands, because refugees were bringing their own culture. And if there were problems in Iraq and other parts of Muslim world in during these two past decades, for example, there was war in Syria, and the war is constantly changing its position over the globe. It's moving from one Islamic country to another, right? So you can understand that if there is a war going on in Muslim countries over the past 4 decades, since I would say since Americans left North Vietnam in 1976, we can see that the war is taking place in Muslim world since the end of 1970s. It was First World was fighting Second World via Afghanistan 1978 onwards, and when Second World or USSR disintegrated into a number of countries by the start of new millennium, we can see that war is shifting on the globe. War shifted to Gulf War, and then it shifted to Iraq War, and then we can also see that even while there was a war between First World and Second World via Afghanistan, there was a war between Iraq and Iran in the latter part of the past century. And when the two Muslim countries stopped fighting, there were wars between You can say that allies were fighting wars in Iraq and then Syria. So you can see that all these situations are actually, these situations have an impact on many other situations that are happening in any country uh, on the globe, right? So if it mentions ethnic minorities or black and migrant and refugee women, so we can understand where these women are coming from, right? uh, and why they are leaving their own countries, and most of these refugees were actually looking for places, looking for protection from Western world. uh, Even if these refugees, for example, the refugees that came to Pakistan uh, after uh, after the war started in Afghanistan in 1978, many Afghan refugees came to Pakistan. But soon after, America gave them political asylum, or some other Western country gave them political asylum. So they were in Pakistan for a short period, and they quickly moved to the Western Bloc, right? So we can understand that many of the refugees are actually aiming at traveling to the Western world. Uh, they, we may have some here also, but most of these people look for, for protection from countries that have better or stronger economic situations, right? So we can see that these migrant women were there in Netherlands, but I think at the start of the new millennium, Netherlands actually decided that it will no longer accept refugees under political asylum laws. So it had a new law after having seen these situations, right? Okay, so it just says that Alec Thomas women, different women, they look very different and they behave differently from normal Dutch women. So you can distinguish migrants from the autochthonous population, right? And it says that many of these are Moroccan and Turkish. The article is actually, I think, pointing to a larger majority of Moroccan and Turkish women. I think this lady that I mentioned earlier is from Somalia. Let me check. Yes, it says Somali-born Dutch American activist. So she has three kind of origins. She is part American, part Somalian, part Dutch. So you can understand that her identity is complex, and under the impact of Dutch and American, she would be very liberal too, right? So whatever she was saying actually coincided with the point of view of Dutch government. All right. So you would notice that the article says that the label is not just migrant woman, but there are also many other labels that are created for these women, right? It says between 1995 and 2005, there was a serious need for emancipation of women, like freeing women from men for to increase their contribution in the economic system or contribution in work, right? There was a parliament was actually discussing. Parliaments had debates on integration of minorities, right? So it just says that Purple Cabinet took office. Social Democrats were in office, and Conservative Liberal Party and all these progressive liberal parties, etc. These people were the actors, and they were discussing what to do with these women. Again, it also mentions Second World War, right? So it is, you can understand that it's amazing how all these articles keep on pointing to world wars, because world wars have a very strong connection with the changes in women's situation or women's position all over the world. I have said it before that when men were at war, uh, at the start of past century and then in the middle of the past century, women were in charge of their homes, and they were working to support their families. And industrialization also had a very strong impact on changes in women's situation. That was right after First World War in 1920s. So women uh, were working, and more working women were there. So uh, working woman posed a lot of threat to masculinity, because men were in charge of finances of the family and they were providers. So you can understand, and I think when in one of these articles we have discussed that beginning 1940s, that is uh, around the time of Second World War, you know, when World War was ending or was still happening, that working women started emerging as femme fatales in the films. So you can see that this article is only saying that this is the first time that a new cabinet was in power in Netherlands, because it says this was the first Dutch cabinet after the Second World War, which means probably the other wing has been ruling uh, Netherlands for quite some time. Uh, and these wings, left or right wing, they had different policies, and they are reacting differently to these problems of migrant women. So in that context, I think it is extremely important to see who was ruling the country at the time. And I think I have mentioned it so many times that even if we are looking at the content of a film, it's extremely important to see the backdrop. I did not mention it in this class, but in the other class, film theory class, I said that the folklores look very romantic and simple, but it's interesting to see that the Sindhi folklore, Umar Marvi, uh, uh, it became Pakistan's first Sindhi film 1956, because Pakistan government eliminated the identities of the provinces. All four provinces were merged into one unit, and Sindhis reacted very strongly to this merger of four provinces of Pakistan. And they said, we do not want to lose our identity, because most of Urdu speaking community that had come to Pakistan had settled in Karachi, which had a strong impact on demographics of Karachi. Karachi, that was dominated by Sindhis before the arrival of Urdu speaking community, was dominated by Urdu speaking community after partition. And Urdu was made university examination language, and Sindhi's status as examination language was eliminated. So you can understand that if a very simple if a very simple story like a folklore, Umar Marvi, can be produced into can be produced as a film in reaction to government's decision to merge the provinces. So everything that looks very romantic uh, and very simple story on the surface can be politicized, and it was a political reaction. This film was produced in reaction to government's policies. It does not say directly that it is against the merger of 4 provinces into one unit, but it was a result of it was produced in reaction to the merger because Sindhis wanted to emphasize on their identity and on their culture. So you can see that even all of these things that look very plain on the surface have a very strong relationship with whatever is happening in a country. Right? So if you look at rest of the article, it is just saying that emancipation was very important for these ethnic minorities because women had to be freed, so their contribution in the economic and social life could be increased. So policy programs of 2001, 2002, 2003, etc. Actually show actually included separate paragraphs, which means that government is creating new policies. So these policies have clearly written paragraphs on the situation of migrant women. These paragraphs discussed opportunities and obstacles for migrant women or in their lives. They face obstacles when these women face when participating in labor and politics, right? So people, their families or migrant male uh, objects to their participation in labor and politics, right? So this lady here is actually participating in politics, and there are other women who are also participating in politics, following these things that are happening in Netherlands at the time. Okay, so it just says that they established a directorate, and directorate is responsible for integration of minorities with the Dutch people. They also, apart from directorate, they have Ministry of Internal Affairs and Ministry of Justice, and all these different departments are working together. And they also ended up with this Minister for Equal Policies, for Equality Policies. So it means that you can clearly see that what is happening here, because equality becomes so important that they end up having a ministry for these kind of things. Which means that when they are doing this, they end up many new kind of frames, and they are saying that frames and counter frames are actually new types of stereotypes, so they have to handle with that problem as well. Okay, so rhetoric of multiculturalism, and these rhetoric is important because they were accepting migrants because they wanted multiculturalism in Netherlands, and they thought it will make it better. So diversity as a quality is introduced as a new orientation of emancipation policy. And as I said earlier, that emancipation actually refers to freeing women from any kind of oppression. So who is responsible for page 276?
Miss, I am responsible for page 277, if it is that page.
Ji, Komal, what would you like to say?
Miss, I would like to quote 2 words as my focus. The authors are focusing on diversity and multiculturalism, right? The authors are trying to say that while authorities are focusing on the fact that we need diversity and it is a source of richness for the society, what is happening in the background is the shift is there is a shift from the backward position of women to diversity, which basically means कि वो औरतों को छोड़कर आप diversity पर आ रहे हैं, which is a problem for the author. When we go down, so the authors are saying that this talk about diversity and multiculturalism is convoluted, right? It's ambivalent, which means that it's very confusing. Because while the authorities want to recognize, value the cultural differences, they don't see it as an advantage. They see it as the social issues. कि जब वो बात करते हैं कि cultural difference आ रहा है, तो the authorities focus on poverty, unemployment और जो बाकी social issues होते हैं. And the government, when they talk about different backgrounds, different ethnicities, they see this as a disadvantage, right? Jabki, when you go down in the paragraphs, so they talk about कि जो policy makers हैं, they do talk about कि how do we need to emancipate minorities. Okay, we do agree कि उनको मिलना चाहिए. लेकिन the authors are saying that they do not, in this talk या फिर in this contestation, they don't talk about women anymore, the migrant women anymore. And then the authors quote the left wing, जो कि वो कहते हैं कि थोड़ा सा बेहतर है, क्योंकि वो the left wing talks about the importance of allowing the migrant woman to the labor market. कि left wing कहता है कि जो migrant woman है उसको difficulty है in accessing the labor market. In the last paragraph, the authors talk about that there are dialogues happening about the importance of making women more emancipated in the migrant woman, but there is no structural change that is coming. There is no structural policy that is coming over, which in their view is a big problem. The dominant government frame is participation frame, जो कि वो कह रहे हैं कि access होना चाहिए था, लेकिन उनकी participation और diversity पे ज़्यादा focus चला गया है, और जो migrant women की access है labor market में वो कम हो गई है, उस पे बात कम हो गई है. So I think that is all I could gather out of this paragraph.
Okay, that's very nice, Komal. Here I would just add one thing. If you look at this one, right? I highlighted a particular line. It says that these issues are important, but government has no right to deprive minorities from expressing their culture, right? So I think this was an important point, because I also mentioned it earlier that they want to give equal rights to migrant women. They want them to because the law says that men and women are equal, but they see that culture does not allow these migrant men and women to actually experience equal rights, right? So the government wants them to integrate in Netherlands culture, and they want their women to, as you said yourself, that they want to improve women's access to work, right? So they have developed this participation frame to improve women's contribution in labor and decision making, right? So decision making is also identified as an important frame at this stage because as probably they are feeling that Muslim societies do not allow women uh, an important role in decision making. So whatever the decision a male makes, that female members or rest of the family members follow those decisions made by the elders of the family or men of the family, right? So here it is only, it is definitely emphasizing on what you said, that women's access to work and women's contribution or participation in decision making should be improved. So we can understand that people who have moved to the West are actually facing this situation whereby they have to create a bridge, or they have to integrate with local culture, because the local culture is emphasizing on equality, right? So yes, as you said, that left wing and right wing are responding differently to the situation. So it says that policy documents are presented to cabinet too, and this document has a restriction frame. We were talking about participation frame, and now it is pointing to restriction frame. So probably they are trying to restrict the migrants, uh, restrict to what it said here, that their right to express their culture, right? So they have the right to express their culture, but they are probably restricting it in a manner that you do not create a clash between your culture and law of the country. And the law allows women equal participation in labor and decision making, right? So that is where this restriction frame emerges, right? uh, and this restriction frame becomes very important. For example, it says forced marriages can be presented, right? Restriction frame through marriages. Through marriages, I believe it is talking about forced marriages can be prevented. Vulnerability frame is also created right here because they have identified women as vulnerable, right? Because somebody is controlling their participation in labor, their participation in decision making, their participation in a decision that is important to their own life, to marry a person of their choice, right? So they are right now identifying a vulnerability frame. So women are vulnerable, right? So Kulsum is not here, is she? Is she here? Komal. Kulsum is not here. So I think I have to take care of this page, right? So it says that migrant women are identified, and a vulnerability frame is created. And this frame actually seeks to protect legally migrant women who have dependent uh, residence permits but seek to leave their violent partner, which means that they have entered Netherlands as a dependent of their male partner, right? So the residence permit says dependent, wife is dependent, but their partner is violent. So they are talking about that because the Western law protects them, and these women are looking for protection under local law. Uh, they are desiring protection from their violent partners, and they want to leave their violent partners. So, which means that there is some disturbance in social order, and Dutch government has to protect these women because they are there, right? So these frames emerge when discussing a proposal for a new law on the integration of migrants. As I said, that the laws are constantly changing, or there is some discussion going on, and these laws relate to their residence permit and other permits, right? So, which means that assessment laws are changing. If these women are desiring protection from local government, they are there as dependents and they need protection. They are not contributing or participating in the system or economic or socio-economic system, but they are there. They need protection. They have to relook into migration laws, right? And they have to relook into issuance of or into assessment for a residence permit. Okay. It says that these assessments were important. So, and when these people come to Netherlands, there are other problems like Dutch language, orientation on Dutch society, which means that if these people are entering Dutch labor market, they should be assessed for these three things. They can speak the language, and they know Dutch culture, and they they can enter labor market. So for women and men, both of three of these factors become important, right? So these things are very important for their participation uh, in Dutch life. So they depend on their partners, and because they are dependent on their partners, they are vulnerable. They are dependent on legally dependent on their partners, and probably they are feeling here a need for less restrictive law because they have entered the country as a dependent, right? This gives a woman an independent permit for after 3 years of marriage in case of death of the partner, or in case of violence, which means that when they enter Netherlands for 3 years, they have 3 years restrictions on their ability to do certain things. So they are right now they are just trying to discuss, the laws should be perhaps less restrictive. So they are trying to discuss restrictive policies because women are desiring to leave their husbands in view of the violation of their rights. Okay, so there onwards it just says that government has different policy initiative programs, and the objective is to stimulate participation of women in labor life and other life. Okay, so it says that state secretary developed policies to stimulate the participation of migrant women because she fears this group will be ignored by both gender equality and integration policy. Right, so they are just trying to focus because they think that some other organization or part of the system may have a different reaction to these positions. So women are identified as vulnerable subjects, and this has an impact on migration law and migration policies, and they are trying to test their situation and reassess if they are prepared to integrate in the Dutch social life. So having a problematic culture becomes a new frame in this process, right? So if somebody is identified that he has a problematic culture, it will have an effect uh, on rest of the decisions, probably his assessment for entering Netherlands. I think somewhere here it does say that the laws were changed and policies of multiculturalism were also changed accordingly. Uh, so it says that integration policies emphasized on acceptation of differences between minorities and the autochthonous population. That if you have accepted these people in the country, you have to understand they have a different culture and accept the difference. It says that the objective was inherent value and enrichment of local culture, right? So, but recognizing difference is also important and valuable. Integration policies run the risk of treating minorities as a category that need care. So this is what the state was doing at the start. It was identifying migrant men and women, or they identified them as a category that needed care, that needed an understanding of a different culture, right? But as they are learning about them, I said in this process, they are deciding that the state has to separate itself from this kind of things. State should not take responsibility for integrating them, for integrating autochthonous and allochthonous minority and majority. G.
Miss, I had a question regarding that part on page 279. So when they categorize minorities separately and usually towards under the category of needing care, and it's usually coupled with poverty and healthcare and the healthcare system and economic reform. So does this also create distinction and more discrepancy between natives and the immigrants in a country? How would it determine their value under the state's eye?
I think what is important here is to understand, as I said earlier, that the system depends on taxes paid by people. So people who are not contributing or who are not participating in the economic system, they are actually consuming what is provided by the state and comes from taxes of the majority, right? So people who are not working, so basically I am sure they had rules. Most of these Western countries have health system. For example, UK has NHS. America also has its own system, which a Canadian feel that is relatively harsher as opposed to the Canadian health system, because they feel that Canadian system is gentle, right? So I would think that they would probably have different laws if people don't have health insurance. Perhaps state would provide them health insurance, and if they are there under migrant visas or work visa policies, so system will provide them protection. I'm not sure how much protection they provide, right? So in most cases, working people get health insurance from their organizations, which means the organizations work under a system that state has already provided, right? So I'm not sure what exactly would be the relationship, but if the article says that it has an impact on health provision of health services and other services. So it will definitely have an impact on the kind of
My question is more centered towards the value of minorities in the Dutch state, in the Netherlands, because this part of the reading, it's written on the top, the title is a more neoliberal approach. So that essentially requires a whole schooling of the system from the state side. So from their perspective, how would the minorities and their values in the Netherlands look at this stage? Because from 2002 to 2005, they did have a very right-centered government, but their social issue approach and stance was more pragmatic and liberal.
Okay.
So
I think where exactly is on this? Is it on this page? Is it in para 1?
no, this was when they were discussing the Balkan first and second cabinet. So this is a right-centered cabinet, but it was they basically propose themselves as right-wing populism with a social, and their approach to social issues was seemingly more liberal while they posed for integration reforms. However, they had like very regressive economic policies. This I've done my own reading on this, so this was just some background history on it.
Yeah, I that's why I'm saying that particular details, relating to a particular kind of service, I think it would require more digging into it, which means that look further and see uh, how they were performing, right? Because I'm sure that that the countries try providing social welfare to all who enter a country. For example, if you get a visa to be in Netherlands as a student, I believe that they would provide you access to all facilities free of charge. But then you have to see what is not covered. For example, when I was on my scholarship in UK back in 1990s. They said that every matter is covered except, for example, dental healthcare and psychological healthcare, which means apart from dental, psychological, or plastic surgery kind of thing, so that's why I'm saying it really depends that what needs to be provided and what is essential. So I do not know their laws, other laws for the migrants. So right now our focus is on what they are doing to improve the situation of women. And they also said earlier that there was a 3-year restriction for their participation in labor market. So they were talking about changing the laws to improve the situation, as some of these women were filing uh, for emancipation or filing for change of status because they wanted to leave their male partners because of some sort of violation of rights. Right. So I think that here it becomes very important that people demand change in status from society to society. So these women were most likely not vocal when they were living in Morocco or in Turkey. But as soon as they moved from their own original cultures to a Western culture, and they noticed that there was a significant difference between their status and Dutch women's status. And they also learned that they could free themselves in those societies. They actually asked for that freedom for themselves. So that's why I'm saying that it's important to understand, like exposure and experience is actually changing the requirements in their lives. So women are actually changing through this movement. And here it says that this plan links emancipation to integration and puts increasing emphasis on socio-cultural obstacles to integration and participation. It just says that religion Islam of migrants are increasingly mentioned as an essential part of the problem. The imported culture is associated with unequal gender relations and with violence as a means to reinforce inequality, honor killings,
Excuse me, miss.
domestic violence and forced marriages.
Excuse me, miss.
जी जी इकरा.
Miss, I'm Mariam. Miss,
जी
this was
मरियम.
my part.
ये आपका पेज है. Okay.
जी, miss.
जी मरियम. So please आपसे पहले अभी किसने क्वेश्चन किया था?
Miss, I guess Myra.
अच्छा. Myra is not here today. अच्छा, Myra is here. जी, तो आप please try explaining your page. I think जो आपका health वगैरह से related question है, उसके लिए we'll need to look at more literature. You can definitely add. जी Mariam.
So basically, Miss discusses this page discusses the rights of the woman and a girl from ethnic minorities, and it puts increasing emphasis on the social culture obstacles. It puts main emphasis on the problems like the culture, heritage, and the religion Islam. The migrant woman faces a number of problems like unequal gender relations, number one, and number two, honor killing, domestic violence, and forced marriages. And it also tells that from 2003 onwards, migrant women have been at the top of the political agenda. The migrant women were defined as the problem policy, and then there's an article which says a closer look at the changing debate, which focuses on the backward position of the migrant woman in education, labor market participation, and social security.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So important point comes back to the same, that you are using social security because you are unemployed, but you are not contributing to social security as such. And here is what it said by Hirsi earlier, because Hirsi Ali was pointing to Islam being the largest obstacle in status of women or ethnic minorities. And so she's probably saying that Islam is responsible for legitimize, because the culture legitimizes violence. Islamic cultures legitimize violence. That it, so Hirsi Ali's framing was it coincided with the framing by other by the state or actors of the state, while these two other women, I wonder if these are women or men. Anyway, it says MPs Azugo and Kausar Kaya. I believe these are two women, also migrant women, and they are criticizing what Hirsi Ali is saying or what the state is saying, because she says the emphasis is too much on culture. And culture, while the emphasis should be socio-economic participation of migrant women, right, and discrimination that is the key obstacle to their participation in the socio-economic development of the country, right. So again, it goes back to allochthonous or different women. And I think this point onwards, they are saying that they are also saying that you have created this stereotype of different women. So they just keep on insisting that why create a new stereotype and why replace a new stereotype with the women, because in documents they are talking about different women, and different women. So different women becomes a stereotype. And yes, they are still talking about, this part is talking about changing debate, because 2000 onwards, when they are talking about diagnosis of the problem, they are also talking about prognosis of the problem or solution of the problem, and that migrant women have they are probably less educated, they are not participating in labor market or social security, as you mentioned. and they need child care support. I think this point onwards, it also takes into account the difference between migrant male and migrant female, because migrant male is responsible for providing uh, or for providing goods to the family, or getting money for the family, and migrant women are mostly caregivers. Okay, so that is the reason you are not talking about one to one, right? So normally when you are talking about husband and wife, if both of them are supporting the family, it will be 1+1, which will equal 2. So it says that if they are not allowing migrant women to work, which means you are not doubling your economic strength. So why not at least make it 1.5 by allowing part-time work to women, and so as caregivers they can take care of the family for part-time, and they can actually contribute in the economic system uh, part-time. So it wouldn't be 1+1 equals 2. It will be 1 plus 0.5, which will be 1.5. Okay, thank you. Who is next? After Mariam Akbar, is Minahil present? Is Minahil present? Ji Minahil, did you read this page? Is her mic working? Okay, all right. So this part is only pointing to, how people from different cultural circles be part of Dutch life, and how to bridge the gap between autochthonous and allochthonous populations within Netherlands, right? So it says that Dutch population is only marginally seen as a target group in this effort, because minorities are targeted, right? Okay, so cross-cultural dialogue begins because there are people who have differences, and they have to focus on reducing differences and assimilate to Dutch standards and values. So the people actually become part of a vibrant Dutch life, reduce differences, and we can see two-way exchange of culture. In 1999, they are saying that they defined that migrant women are lagging behind in their participation in labor market, in decision making, and socio-economic resources, and they are dependent on social security system. So following this, they started making new plans for changing the situation of migrant women. This problem was identified, so it was linked with their knowledge, education, and language skill, and socioeconomic causes that were important. So that should become a mechanism for changing their status in the labor market, right? Um, so it just says that reversal of causal language becomes important, and cultural integration becomes important, and so they identified a precondition which was essential for their full participation in social and economic life, right? So that precondition actually relates to what they are saying, that migrant women problem is growing, and in emancipation of, I think I mentioned it earlier, that before the arrival of these migrants, it was more emancipation of Dutch women was under discussion. But as migrant women came with a new set of problems, and problems that were far more stronger, they started feeling that Dutch women have actually achieved emancipation. They are no longer dependent on their husbands or subordinate to their husbands, and they are liberated. But Dutch women are liberated, but migrant women need to be liberated. I think this is a comment which is very relevant to the opening of the film Sartan Rouge, because it is talking about the liberated Dutch woman becomes the norm, right? What if I was liberated was the first dialogue of the film, and right here it is saying that Dutch woman is considered liberated and she becomes the norm and role model for the traditional migrant woman who is in dire need of liberation, right? So right this point onwards, the frame is changing for and they have identified migrant woman who needs liberation, while Dutch woman is fine. So Muslim women are put forward as principal policy targets and principal agents of change, right? Because they have identified Muslim women with their so much problems, and Muslim women are considered different. So these emancipation of Muslim women is very important for the Dutch society at present.
Ma'am, I just had to say that Kulsum Mazhar and Nimra Akram's internet has disconnected, so they wanted me to inform you.
It's okay. I think I already marked attendance of both the slots. And number two, I think we are almost reaching the end of the class and end of today's session, right? And we have discussed most of the points in the articles. Some points I mentioned earlier because those points are coming up just now. So they are okay. Ask them to, like they can read or they can listen to the recording. Okay?
मैम सेकंड सेशन के भी रहती नहीं है?
नहीं, मैंने अटेंडेंस दोनों सेशंस की इकट्ठा लगा दी थी जहांगीर, क्योंकि जब आपने मुझे कहा था कि अटेंडेंस लगा लें, उस वक्त 12 बजने में कोई, आई थिंक इट वाज अबाउट 5 to 11, तो मैंने चेक किया था तो दोनों स्लॉट्स नजर आ रही थी, तो आई रिकॉर्डेड अटेंडेंस फॉर बोथ द स्लॉट्स. ओके जी. तो यहाँ पे इट इज ओनली सेइंग दैट नेदरलैंड में 40% of Dutch women between 15 and 65 years of age are economically independent. I think if we compare this with Pakistan, women in Pakistan can't think of economic independence at age 15, right? And it is a result of at least part-time work, it says. So I think these things are important. So by this point, they have actually realized that Muslim women who are in Netherlands, they at least need to work part-time. And that's why I said that they are just trying to find a solution for the problem, because Muslims keep on insisting that it is our culture and they should have the freedom to practice their culture. Nobody is denying that women's participation in economic life is important, but they're just trying to work it out how to solve the problem. And that's why I mentioned earlier that they came up with this 1.5 model, right? It's mentioned right here. So male is the breadwinner and female is the caregiver. And within this 1.5 model, they decided that women should be asked to work at least part-time. So if they are working part-time, so as caregivers, their economic condition would improve and their participation in socio-economic life and decision-making would also improve. Okay, So we did not discuss implications, cultural implications. I think Komal asked earlier if it became, if Hiam Abbas stories became heavily controversial. In Tunisia, I think it will, if not in Tunisia, it is definitely very, very controversial within Muslim world, because as we can see that Hiam Abbas is actually uh, getting uh, lots of economic independence, because earlier she could not buy new shoes for herself. She could not go to most expensive hairstylists in the city, and she was not opting for certain style of certain hairstyles as a traditional mother. So we can see that economic independence and ability to make decisions actually changes the look of a person, right? So I think all these points need to be connected to women's labor, women's situation. And I feel that this is a unique story because this story is not focusing on everyday protagonists. It is focusing the life of a widow. And in most cases in Muslim world, we do not think that widows can have a life of their own, especially like Hiam Abbas in this film, right? Hiam Abbas moves from one end of she moves across two extremes from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. She's a very traditional woman and a widow at the start of the film. And in the middle part, it just highlights how her life changes. She is no longer an everyday woman who many would say have boring everyday life. Instead, she becomes a woman who has a secret life, life that her neighbors will not accept, and a life that her family will not accept, because she never discloses these facts to her family. And the only person who is aware of the fact is the son-in-law, uh, with whom she had a relationship. And the boy actually tells her that he cannot continue a relationship with her. He did not know that his girlfriend is Hiam's daughter. He just tells her that his girlfriend wants him to meet her mother. And when he comes to meet the mother, he realizes that it's Hiam, who he already knew, and he had a relationship with the woman. And Hiam actually does not come in the way of the daughter. When daughter gets to get a drink or tea for her boyfriend, Hiam just tells the guy that I will be a very good mother-in-law, right? So I think that the story is unique, and it's very different. We need to examine how culture or how Muslim culture changes from one country to another. It would be interesting to see differences between Islamic cultures from Pakistan to India to Korea to Morocco, Uganda, UAE, and other parts of the world. So I think it's just important to understand that how Muslim societies uh, perform and how they are seen by other societies, especially when they become ethnic minorities in the Western world. And Western world does look at Muslim cultures as misogynistic, and Western cultures feel that Muslims, when they come to their world and they start living there, they bring in a set of problems. They see problems of multiculturalism. Their law demand that they should be given the right to live the way they want to live, and right to perform or exercise or promote their culture. But then this right clashes with the law of the land, and they have to come up with new solutions. So I think in this case, the solution or 1.5 model is actually good because it at least improves women's contribution in economic life in Netherlands, and I believe that would have an impact on that will have an impact in bringing change in other aspects of women's life in Netherlands as well. Okay, so the negative representation of migrant women as traditional, backward, and potentially victims may limit the discursive opportunities for identification and participation of migrant women, and thus may have opposite effect for what government aims to accomplish, because government wants to give them equal rights, government wants to strengthen them, but the problems keep on changing. But any comments, you can certainly give your comments, because I think we have discussed more or less every concept that is mentioned here, and we can see that Dutch society is constantly recognizing Muslim women as that they feel that Muslim women are actually invisible uh, within their own cultures, because that invisibility is highlighted through the veil they wear, that invisibility is highlighted through their lack of performance in or lack of participation in economic like in the system or in economy. So they are Muslim women are mostly invisible women, and this is actually focusing on increasing their visibility through their participation in work, and through protecting them from violence, from forced marriages, and honor killing that is mentioned in this article. So basically, it is just saying that these Muslims have brought their culture to Netherlands, and they need emancipation, and women in particular need emancipation, and women should be those who are ready to work on their emancipation, and who have who have the access to work, and they only need to work it out how to improve their situation. Ji. Any comment? I think try relating these texts to the situations in Pakistan or to wherever you go in future. One last thing, this is a big group of students. 20 students is a large number. I think when we start presentations on Monday, we should try that our presentations are not very long. We should try to finish our presentations within 7 minutes, because if we do not finish presentations in 7 minutes, we will not finish presentations by all, right?
Yes, regarding the presentations, it's stated that we can present on any topic or any assignment we've done.
You can present on any topic that is mentioned in your Google Classroom. So the topics should be from the topics should be selected from here, and I think you have it's giving you the freedom to actually freedom to select a topic from here, right? Any of the topics from here. But you can also present one of your assignments if you do not want to present your midterm. I thought you should present your midterm, because I have asked you to finish your midterm definitely by Sunday. I give you a lot of time for doing the midterm, because I want you to spend time on midterm. But I think some people haven't started yet. If had you started, I would go for presentations Friday onwards, but I gave you the deadline of Sunday, so we can't start presentations this Friday.
Oh,
presentations, it can be any topic. Is there anything you want us to focus on within those 7 minutes, like any main themes or goals that the presentation should have?
It is saying present your assignment or midterm, right? And I am suggesting that you present your midterm. So your midterm questions already have a goal. You should have a thesis statement. Midterm says that include a film scene in discussion. It says include dialogue in discussion and elaborate in dialogue. For example, during today's discussion, I pointed to the dialogue, what if I were liberated? The film starts with it, right? And this article also has this same comment: Dutch women are liberated, Muslim women are not liberated, right? So that is where these articles actually coincide. We did not read anything from this article on Egypt, but I said that Qasim Amin and Azza Haikal actually started talking about women liberation 200 years ago in Egypt. In Pakistan, it's pretty recent, right? It's probably a late 20th century or early 21st century phenomenon. So we can see that in other parts of Muslim world, this debate started much earlier. Okay, so you just think of a thesis statement about the film scene that you have selected, and your goal is to prove your point. जी आप क्या कह रही थी? Did anyone have a question about the question paper? Because class time has ended, but I think there were a couple of students who had some question about the question paper. You can ask me now, or we can end the session. Anybody who wants to ask a question can stay, and I think everyone else can also leave if you don't have a question. Ji.
Allah Hafiz, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the session. And